Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tales from the Trenches, a conversation with expert heat pump practitioners. We're thrilled to have you join us today. My name is Shelby Breger, and I'll be your MC for today's session. Whether you are a seasoned technician, an install manager, a sales team member, or an operator, today's discussion aims to deliver you insights that can help you enhance your practice and better serve your customers. Today, in this industry that's constantly evolving, keeping up with the latest trends and technologies is more than just a necessity. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for efficiency and more importantly, an opportunity to deliver a superior customer service. So today, I'm beyond excited for the panel of experts that we have that will be diving into a set of questions ranging from the intricacies of inverter technology to understanding the phase down of certain refrigerants. We'll explore cost considerations for both natural gas and electricity, the rise of high-efficiency heat pumps, and even discuss the nuts and bolts, quite literally, of common technical challenges like flare nut leaks. This isn't about pushing any particular agenda. It's about equipping you with the knowledge you need to make informed decisions. Decisions that may lead to my face being frozen on the screen right now, and to deliver the optimal solutions to your clients. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeremy Begley, who is a seasoned expert in high-performance HVAC design. Jeremy leads HVAC Design Partners, a venture focused on high-performance HVAC design, testing, and commissioning for custom single-family residences, commercial multifamily buildings. So with that, over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Shelby. I just want to welcome everyone today and thank you for participating and viewing our webinar. As Shelby said, today we're going to be talking about some of the most important people in the heat pump food chain, which is the contractors with their boots on the ground. As a third-party design company, we often feel like we have the perfect design and it should be implemented perfectly. But going from paper into real world implementation is often a much different situation and depends and relies on the skill sets of our contractors that are actually installing the designs. And there's a lot of things that can get lost in translation between a design and getting it into a contractor's hands. Sometimes you have situations where the contractor is your direct client and you're communicating with them 100% of the time. Things tend to go a little smoother then, but oftentimes we have builders as our clients or architects as our clients or other engineers as our clients, and the contractors themselves start getting second or third hand information. They may not get the full breadth of the design. So it ends up being really important to get the contractors involved in as early and as often as possible in the actual implementation conversation. And I think as you guys are going to see today, from talking to our contractors, there's a ton of little tiny nuances that go into successfully implementing any kind of HVAC installation. And especially now that we're introducing concepts that may be a little foreign to our homeowners and things that they're not used to seeing or hearing, or even implementing newer technology when it comes to the different types of heat pumps that the contractors may not be even used to seeing or hearing, and the things that they have to pay attention to. So without further ado, I will turn it back over to Shelby and let her introduce our MC and get things going for us. Shelby.
Amazing. Well, if I look like a black void on your screen as well, apologies for that. I'm thrilled to introduce the moderator for today's conversation, Clifton Beck. Clifton Beck is the digital media manager at ESCO Institute with over 25 years of experience in the HVAC industry. He has served both the residential and commercial sectors of the industry and transitioned from the field to the classroom to become a technical service advisor and trainer for a wholesaler with 18 branches as well. Most recently, Mr. Beck worked for Bluon, where he developed curriculum, and he now oversees the development and implementation of many digital resources at ESCO Institute, an organization dedicated to the education of the industry. So with that, I'll hand it over to Clifton to lead the discussion for the next hour.
All right, Shelby, thank you so much. And we are very grateful for MajorQuick for hosting this heat pump conversation. So we are starting to get a lot of nuances in the industry as we make transitions into higher efficient equipment, where we're spending more time looking at heat pumps and the capabilities of heat pumps. but there are a lot of pitfalls. There are a lot of stories from the field that need to be shared and conversations to have over how to look at different aspects of heat pump development. So we're going to spend some time with a variety of different contractors from many different aspects and different viewpoints of heat pump technologies who can give us some insight, some experience, some ways to look at our transitions to gain that insight that we're all looking for. So we appreciate everyone joining us today, and let's start out with Thomas Hoffmaster. Thomas, how are you out there doing today?
Doing well.
All right, so for everyone who is joining us, remember, we're going to look at things from a variety of different aspects. So Thomas is a mechanical and consultant in West Virginia, fairly new into the company, but has 20 years of experience and does technical support as well. So you see both the installation and the service side of things. So what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about some of the questions, some of the transitions that you see. And one in particular, when we start talking about sizing heat pumps and using heat pumps for our comfort, we also have to look at the potential energy set points as well, right? So if we talk about balance point of a heat pump, a lot of people get a little confused as what that actually looks like. So Thomas, tell us a little bit about balance point in your area when we're looking at heat pump sizing and heat pump comfort.
All right. So just kind of a little bit of background. I've actually, I forgot to correct it on the sheet earlier. I've actually been a little over 30 years in the business. I spent the last 16 and a half being a technical support for OEMs.
Yes.
And so a lot of my history is me usually helping people understand things after the fact because they didn't ask us ahead.
Sure.
And so typically when we're dealing with balance point, especially from that perspective, is we're usually looking at the output ability of the heat pump versus the load. And at what point does the capacity of the heat pump, at what temperature does the capacity of the heat pump and the load match? At what temperature does that occur? And as your picture shows here, anything to the left of that point, we're going to need supplemental heat. Anything to the right, the heat pump is able to cover the load. But that's just, this is just basically, we look at as far as economic balance point in the sense that we're trying to maximize the ability of the heat pump and minimize the need of any other heat. And so that point that we're seeing here on the screen is just based on that specific. However, that doesn't always tell the full story.
Exactly.
So the story gets larger and it gets more involved because when we're looking at that particular balance point, as you see there, that being just the economic version of trying to, again, understand at what point do I need help, if you will. But that doesn't mean that the customers are going to be comfortable at that temperature. As the temperature declines and the capacity of the heat pump declines, we may find that when we get closer to that balance point, we may find that we end up in a situation where they start to lose comfort, right? Because as the output temperature of the heat pump goes down, and it does, what happens is a lot of the surfaces in the area outside of the envelope of the house that radiate temperature, we start to see that fall a little bit. And so the mean temperature, or whatever you want to refer to it as, right? The radiant surfaces, as those start to decline as well, we start to see that we start having comfort issues.
Exactly.
And so what I really have been running into though for years and years is the simple fact that you're usually called in because people are selling heat pumps. They're selling expectations.
Right. Exactly.
That they can't manage and that they haven't even determined with a load calculation.
And that's what's critical when we look at those load calculations and the capability of the heat pumps, because when we start comparing heat pumps, they do not all perform the same. So it's very important to know what those capabilities are. And as we start looking at the difference between comfort and efficiency, now we have to start looking at, okay, how much comfort are we willing to sacrifice to maintain energy efficiency? A lot of places around the world look at it more of the efficiency balance point and not as much of like the comfort. Here in America, we like to keep things within a degree. Most people, right? But if we look at the heat output, we have to look at the the descending capability of the heat pump, not just the BTUs that it can provide, but what is the energy consumption that we're producing? And we have to look at the COP, the coefficient of performance, so that we can see how many BTUs that we are using and we are reducing, because at some point it's going to be more economical to use a secondary energy source, whether that is electric resistant heating or it's a gas fuel. We have to look at what that balance point is and how much comfort are we willing to sacrifice to maintain the most fuel efficient opportunity.
Yeah, and so I had this big slide I always show classes that I teach and dealers that I work with. Is like comfort and efficiency are opposing values.
They're different.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and so you're going to have to decide. But what I have found over the years is that what we really see is most of the time we're trying to find a balance between those two, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes that balance, even if we did everything is absolutely correct, right? Even if we go in, we do a full load calculation and we do all that, still yet comfort is subjective to the end user.
Absolutely.
And so we have found that sometimes we'll tell them, you know what, you're going to have to start with this range. Maybe, especially some of the other things that we run into, by the way, is also what kind of supplemental heat are we going to use? Are we going to switch over to gas or propane, like in my area mainly? So, that temperature is going to be a little different. And there are times where, Mr. Sun gives us a little help, right?
Exactly.
And so that sunny day at 30 degrees is a little different than that overcast rainy day at 30 degrees. So what we find is we start suggesting after we run the numbers, right? Because the math works. So then we start setting a range saying, okay, you know what? We're going to lock out the furnace above this temperature, lock out the heat pump below this temperature, but in that gap, right? Make sure we have the right controls, obviously the thermostat and all that enable us to do this. But we're going to let the heat pump come on first. And if it's not able to, to handle, then we'll go ahead and switch over to that auxiliary. But we at least give them a range so that on the days where the sun does help out, then we'll take that. And the days where it doesn't, well, we're going to minimize the amount of runtime of the heat pump so we don't waste energy, but we're trying to just maximize both comfort and efficiency and try to balance it out the best we can.
And it's very important to help the consumer understand that, because in the past, we've always talked about that balance point as simply being the heat load cross point. This is the point at which the heat pump cannot keep you comfortable within your expectation. And below that, we're going to have to do something different. But as we see increases in utility costs, now we have to be more aware of what is that balance point. Can we sacrifice a little bit of our comfort to be able to maximize the efficiency, the energy efficiency of our home and our structure? So I think as we start looking forward at new equipment, we have to start looking at the comfort and the energy consumption both simultaneously in every conversation, so that the consumer is more aware of actually what they're getting into.
Yeah, a lot of times the jobs I go out to, even now as a consultant, a lot of times we're actually trying to go back and help understand how we got to here and what we could do go forward to try to make the system that's already been sold and installed work as best as possible. And it's really, it really gets, it's sad sometimes, to be quite honest with you, because there's so many people out here that are selling these expectations that they can't deliver on.
No, absolutely. That's a lack of education from the contractors as well.
Yeah. I did a class yesterday, and I had one 10-year and one 15-year technician in there, plus some guys with less experience. And it's funny you got the picture up there because here's the handout, right?
Yeah, look at that. Right.
One guy who's a 10-year guy, another guy who's 15-year veteran guy has never seen a balance point worksheet in their life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the problem is we're sending technicians out here to try to make adjustments or whatever, and they don't understand it. And of course, the end user's frustrated because they think that they paid extra money for this more high efficient system, or they've been sold on the benefits of this heat pump, but a lot of times they've been put in conditions that they just can't, that they'll never be satisfied with that product. And you mentioned like our ductless product. When you think about ductless product and where it's developed and how things are across the sea, right? In the European markets and the Asian markets, they're using Celsius. And so them wanting to hold it at 0.5 degree or 1 degree, it's totally different.
Yeah, the calculations aren't the same.
Yeah, no, not
the
at all.
conversion rates are very different.
Yeah, and so we have people selling ductless units thinking they're going to deliver comfort in the same way that our ducted with the regular thermostat on the wall, and they're apples and oranges.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we start talking about that and we start looking at the energy efficiency of these units and understand that many of these new pieces of equipment are really focusing on energy efficiency, not exactly comfort, right? They're designed
Right.
for energy efficient usage. And so we have to look at two different things. We have to look at the capability of it, and we have to look at the cost for using those utilities. And so there are a lot of varying costs across the nation. A lot of people don't know that our utilities flex during the
Yes.
season and throughout the entire country. So let's take a look at, just for we've got a few minutes left here, let's talk about these high efficiency systems that you mentioned before. Are you marketing high efficiency heat pumps and the capabilities of them and looking at those on your balance point? Because I can tell you here in the area, I live in central Indiana, and one of our coworkers up in Chicago had a contractor come out. They were looking at retrofitting their fossil fuel system into a capable heat pump system. And they had 4 contractors out, and all 4 contractors told them heat pumps didn't work in Illinois. So what do you see and what do you offer when it starts the conversation of high efficiency heat pumps?
So me personally, I mean, I look at heat pumps as a possible solution in somewhat any environment, as long as you know what it's capable of.
Exactly.
So let's say that I got an older farmhouse. I'm not going to say stay away from a heat pump at all, but what we're doing, we do a load calculation, and we're going to say, okay, this is what this heat pump's going to be able to do, because I'm not going to grossly oversize this thing to try to compensate to make the numbers look better, right? I'm going to make sure
Right.
that I deliver the cooling and dehumidification that we need. So
Yes.
manual S has to be adhered to strictly.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that the heat pump's not going to help them on those shoulder season, right? And give them a little savings, right? Because I'm already there installing a line set in an outdoor unit, right?
Exactly. Might as well
But
get the
so
maximum benefit.
I could sell the heat pump and manage the expectations to what's actually real, right?
Exactly.
And what could happen, and then go into that fossil fuel, because until they make upgrades to the house. Or I'm more about selling solutions
No, that's
that
what we do.
that
We
work.
find a solution for the customer.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so and when we go to a house, we're looking at an older house, and they're asking about high efficiency heat pumps. We have the conversation, but
Mhm.
we explain to them, okay, we can have a high performance system. Let's talk about the
The
house and the
nuances, the
home.
differences, and look at your
Yeah.
structure. Yeah.
So I could put a Porsche engine in a Volkswagen Beetle, but those
Yeah.
little skinny tires and those aerodynamics, well, you're not really going to do very well, right?
That's
So
right.
we have to look at it and say, are you willing to do something different to the space? Are you going to look at the outside envelope? Are you going to make changes there? I mean, what are you really looking to go high efficiency in the entire overall
Entire
setting?
structure.
Yeah, because just
Exactly.
a high efficiency heat pump in that old drafty house isn't going to cut it. You're not going to be
Exactly.
happy.
All right, Thomas Hoffmaster, we sure appreciate your time with us today, and very enlightening. And we look forward to more conversations with you about this aspect of our industry. All right, Tim DeStacio, I know you're out there with us. Tim, how are you, man?
Just fine. Thanks for having me.
Tim, you are very embedded in the efficiency of systems. I see you using software. I see you using Measure Quick. I see you looking at your own structure and the efficiency. You've got a lot of experience, both as a technician, a contractor owner, an educator. You've got to see all these different sides, and you've seen the capabilities and the inefficiencies of some of the technologies. So let's talk about one of my personal pet peeves and one of my favorite things to dive into in classes. A lot of reasons that we have a hard time selling to the consumer, and even selling to some of our own technicians the benefits of using high performance systems, is a lot of our ductless systems get a bad reputation. And I know
That's
from
right.
my own field service experience, so I did a lot of field service evaluations for a major manufacturer of equipment. And I don't know, I don't have exact statistics. I can go back through all my service calls, but I would say that it was probably above 90% of my field site calls were improper installation, and primarily from failed flare connections. So let's talk a little bit about your experiences with failed flares and the differences in using the correct tools for doing the installations.
Yeah, so nowadays we have a lot more tools at our disposal than maybe we had years ago.
Yeah.
Years ago, when I got started, even when I started my first contracting business about 12, 13 years ago,
Hmm.
we had just your regular flaring block.
A plumber's
Uh,
block,
yeah, pretty
not an
much.
HVAC or refrigeration block, a plumber's block. That's where we
Right.
adopted them from.
Yeah, and then a little bit later on, we had to our in our tool bag maybe a one-piece flaring
Yep.
um, tool that took maybe some of the variables out, but there's still a lot of variables with your old school flaring blocks. It's the depth of where you set the copper, where you tighten the flaring block around the pipe. If you set it too shallow or too deep, you get the results that we see here on the screen. And also, a lot of installers forget to do things like cleaning and deburring the pipe before they
Oh,
even try to flare it.
it's
And the most
crazy.
important thing they always forget is to put the flare nut on first. That's
I
rule number one, right?
may have done a few of those in my
Yeah.
lifetime.
If you haven't done this.
I always looked
Yeah.
at my mentor. If he had the smile on his face, I knew what
Yeah.
I'd look down and go, oh,
Right.
you gotta be
Yeah.
kidding.
And so there is a lot of room for error there. And especially as we are trying to figure out as an industry how to put what I call butts in trucks,
Oh,
how
buddy.
to fill this skills gap
Yeah.
where we have skilled technicians that are getting out and they're not getting replenished by the next generation. And so we've got to figure out a way to get people with less experience, less skill to be able to do the same amount of work
Sure.
and to be able to develop the skills needed even for the high performance work. And so one of the main things that I think a contractor should think about is investing in tools and technology that shifts
Key.
that experience
Yeah.
away from the technician that may not have it and put that burden on the tools and the technology.
Absolutely.
And one of those things is like like a battery operated flaring tool. NAVAC is one brand. It's less than $400.
Yeah.
I just checked today. And that really takes a lot of the variables out where as long as they cut the pipe, they clean the pipe, deburr it, they set the tool in there, there's very little to mess up, and you got a perfect flare, repeatable over and over again. And
I
that's
grab
something
a
you can
roll of
put.
I grab a
Go
roll of
ahead.
quarters when I do that in a class, and I take experienced contractors and go, okay, you use whatever toolkit you want, and I'll give you a quarter for every flare that you get proper that sits inside of this flare gauge with whatever tool you want. And
Yeah.
for every one that you mess up that doesn't fit, you give me a quarter. And then when you're tired of giving me quarters, I'll show you a tool that actually can do this properly and save you time
Right.
in the long run. And so
Yeah.
it's a very important to teach the efficiency of tools because our tools have become more efficient.
Right. Things like a digital torque wrench. Again, NAVAC makes one of those because years ago, what did we use? We used a couple of wrenches like what you see there on the right.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you, there is a big difference
That's
between
huge.
what is tight to me and what is tight to a young apprentice with
Yeah.
underdeveloped forearms because he
Yeah.
hasn't been turning wrenches for 20 years.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times I would go back on the system we'd put in a year, 6 months earlier, and I've got that it's not performing right. It's a callback. We're coming back there in a warranty call. And the first thing that I see is that drop of oil that's right on the flare nut
Right.
telling me I've
You
got a
know what's
leak. And
there.
even worse, I have to pull the indoor unit off the wall
To re-verify
and
all
take
of them.
everything off just to find that drop of oil.
That's
And
right.
that is a mess. And then I go and I crank on it and I get a half more of a turn.
Yep.
And I really thought about, investing in gym memberships for some of my employees because it was like, look, you guys are not turning wrenches hard enough. All right. There are digital torque wrenches out there. There are torque specs on flare connections.
Every manufacturer
that-
has it in the installation manuals.
Exactly. And it takes, again, the variables out of the equation so that we can put butts in trucks.
Yeah.
Hand them these tools, give them some training on how to use the tools, set your expectations. And then hopefully, some of the other challenges don't happen. Something that I learned as a contractor is you can do all that. You can put the right tools in the hands of the people, but still you're going to run into the situation where they lose the $400 tool that you gave them. They dropped it in the mud, stepped on it a few times before they realized they dropped it in the mud, and now the tool's making funny noises when you try to operate it. Those are the challenges that are just, it's
There's a
inherent.
tale from the trenches right there.
Yeah,
It
and
is.
so yeah, ask me how I know.
Yeah, it sounds like that might be a personal experience.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean,
Yeah,
I sympathize a
yeah,
lot with contractors who are employers who are dealing with that because we're dealing with less experienced people coming into the trade, people with
right.
less mechanical aptitude or at least a mechanical experience coming into the trade. They didn't grow up turning
It's a
wrenches
generational
on their
change.
skateboard,
Exactly.
and now we're teaching them righty tighty, lefty loosey
Mm.
on the job when
Without
you and I
specification.
probably learned it when we were 8 years old working on our skateboard or our bike.
Absolutely,
So
bicycle.
all those challenges are huge. So again, if we can shift some of that to just put the tool on the pipe and then press the trigger, you take a lot of that variable,
Well,
those problems out of the
and
equation.
think about just from the performance side and from the service side of it. That one call, that one site visit, you
Yep.
have now lost all of your time from your management. You've lost all of the time from your technician, and you have lost profits. So doing it
Yeah.
right the first time is what it comes down to, and then validating the system performance. This is
Yep.
another thing that you're really big on. And I'm an advocate for using tools like MeasureQuick to be able to analyze the performance of a system. How do you know how well the system is performing? How do you know how well it's performing without actually testing and verifying it?
Yeah, and that's really important to be able to verify that you're delivering not only the capacity but the efficiency that
Efficiency.
you sold them.
Exactly.
And what I tell people, especially people that I'm consulting for, your contractor sold you a 20 SEER system. Was he able to prove to you that it's
Right.
operating at 20 SEER?
Exactly.
And so the two things that we really need to get better at doing in this industry, two things: checking airflow and checking charge.
100%.
Years ago, we checked airflow with the handometer, felt good coming out of the vents. Maybe we checked to make sure our blower wheel wasn't dirty, our filter was clean, our indoor coil was clean, but we had no accurate way of quantifying airflow without getting like a flow hood or traversing the duct or something that
I
was
agree.
time consuming and still a lot of potential for error.
It didn't happen
Now
on
we
the
have
residential
things.
side.
Exactly. And now we have things like TEC's True Flow Grid that you can stick in a filter grill and you've got your airflow right there. It takes less than 5
Very,
minutes to
very
get that
accurate.
reading. We have things like MeasureQuick that talks to these digital tools. It talks to that True Flow Grid so that we can quantify the capacity of the system. And it, again, we're putting butts in trucks. We got people with a lot less experience coming in, and we need an app that's going to tell them whether the system is low on charge, an app that's going to tell them how many ounces of refrigerant to put in the system. Because years ago, it was like, well, it's not cooling right. It's not heating right. We're going to use, again, the handometer. And I can't tell you how many systems that I personally overcharge, especially heat pumps.
Oh, I
You're
could
trying to
imagine how
charge a
many.
system in heating mode. It's
Yeah.
cold out there. You don't really know what it should look like.
Right.
And so you turn the jug upside down and you start dribbling a little bit of refrigerant in. Next thing you know, you're back in the summertime because the thing is overcharged. And who knows how many years of life you just shaved off the system. So MeasureQuick is a huge tool. There is not that much of a learning curve anymore to learn MeasureQuick with their guided workflows. It literally takes me 15 minutes to do a performance check on the system. The guided workflows walk us right through the whole process. And so we have to pay attention to those things, even paying attention to some of the smaller points of performance, like approach temperature. That's the difference
Sure.
between liquid line temperature in heating mode and the return air temperature coming in. And you can very quickly screen a unit whether it has a charge problem or an airflow
An
problem
airflow.
just by checking that temperature difference. If it's too low or too high, and I've put out several videos on there about how to kind of
Good
screen
good
that.
videos.
And it's very easy. But the great thing about MeasureQuick is it takes all that information, it gives you in one report. It even tells you what your coefficient of performance is, and you can
Which is
compare that
huge.
against what
That's
it
one of my favorite
should be.
numbers. A lot of people don't even think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So checking performance was hard before the last few years. With
I agree.
digital pros, it got a little bit better. But again, how do we take those readings and interpret them what they should be? Because the heat pump is going to cool to a different set of parameters if it's 75 degrees outside versus 90 degrees outside, whether it's 72 degrees in the house or 75 degrees in the house, whether it's 40% humidity or 60% humidity. All those are huge variables that change where those dials are. MeasureQuick tells you where they should be. It allows you to benchmark the system. And then that way, when you come back
Yeah.
to check the system 6 months, a year later, do
You got something
maintenance
to
on it,
validate against.
Exactly. And as those variables are different, you come back in the springtime, it's not hot anymore. It checks the performance against that benchmark with those variables built in. So using Measure Quick, I'm going to tell you as a contractor, you will not succeed in the next generation of heat pump installations if you are not using Measure Quick as it is intended. And your root of failure will come back to not properly commissioning and checking a system. And it doesn't have to be that difficult anymore.
Love it. Tim DeStacio, thank you so much, man. I can't say how much I appreciate having you as a brother HVAC
Thanks.
member of the trenches.
That's right.
All right, thanks, Tim. All right, let's hop in here with Bill Fisher. Bill, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Clifton. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So, Bill, I know you've been in the industry for quite a while. You've gotten into your own contracting, but you do a lot of education on, particularly like with mini splits and heat pumps. So you're branching out in an environment that is starting to become more comfortable with heat pump technology and the transitions that we're seeing. Now, one of the things I always like to talk about too is, we are seeing not just changes in equipment, but we are also seeing changes in refrigerant. So as we move into what I call our next generation of heat pumps, all of our cold climate heat pumps, our inverter driven heat pumps, we're going to see a lot of equipment coming out with new refrigerants like R32 and 454B, right? An HFC and then an HFC blend, but we're also on this HFC phase down. So those of us that are comfortable with things like R410A, our pressures aren't going to be drastically different from R32 and 454B, but some of our practices need to be reevaluated a little bit. So do you hear much talk amongst our technicians or even our consumers about changes of equipment and changes of refrigerant?
There's not a whole lot of discussion out there, Clifton, where I am. Virginia, I'm in Western Virginia, Shenandoah Valley, and we're just starting to transition into it.
Yes.
The knowledge is out there that it's coming, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of concern in our area right now. We're going to do a teach for the local community college, and we had put on a course using the ESCO platform for A2Ls.
Oh, thank you.
And nobody signed up for it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was a marketing problem on the school side or if people are it's just a big yawn out there about it. But the distributors now are starting to come up with courses. Our local distributors doing a 454 class tomorrow. Actually, I'm sending some of the crew down to that.
Absolutely.
But I don't see a lot of concern from the technician's point of view, and that may be because of ignorance on their part. The customers have not asked me about it at all. The customers don't even know it's coming.
Yeah,
so
that's the biggest fear.
Piece for us here as we transition to that. The most concern with the A2Ls, of course, is the flammability, and you have to be able to get across to the customer and the technicians that it's flammable, but it's not that flammable.
Exactly.
It has
some nuances.
Yep. And there are some practices that we're going to have to change. We have to make sure the equipment's A2L qualified.
And that our building codes will accept it, because there are some that have not passed that yet. We just had the EPA approve the technology transition rule, which is going to remove our high GWP refrigerants, HFC refrigerants like R410A. So our sector, our residential split systems, that's January of 2025. So there will no longer be R410A residential split systems after January 1st of 2025. And so making sure that as a industry, we're aware of this and that we are educating our consumers that we are going to be making transitions. And there's a lot of information out here, and there's not a lot of consumption of that information. So let's talk, as we're talking about changes in the industry, let's also talk about something that is a little unique in your area. So if we talk about gas banning, because there's a difference between decarbonization and electrification. So there are areas that are starting to remove natural gas connections on new construction. Let's talk about fuel sources in your area and what you see for energy, because some places don't have the same energy in different parts of the country. A lot of people don't understand that.
Clifton. So we're in an area where we don't have, at least in my local area, we don't have natural gas pipelines. It's all propane.
Right.
The larger cities to the south and to the north of us, they do have natural gas, but we strictly around here we're propane. The folks that have propane, either dual fuel or propane furnaces, I'll have that discussion with them about cost of propane going up as opposed to the efficiency of a heat pump system or a VRF system. Some folks are very hesitant to turn away from the propane just because they're comfortable with it. Mostly folks my age. The younger folks seem to be fine with the change, but basically maybe because of the experience of the lack of experience in colder weather and owning a home. But not a whole lot of concern here for that changeover. We'll also have the discussion about the cost of electricity versus the cost of propane.
Sure.
Talk to them about the efficiency of the variable speed systems, and also talking about the backups. If they want that fossil fuel backup, we can do it with the dual fuel. They seem to be very comfortable with it. I don't really have a long conversation with the folks with those systems. I very rarely come across anybody who's hard over for
a gas only
fossil fuel. I think we're starting to get in that direction in understanding the variable speed stuff, and also the cost is coming down now for the variable speed. I mostly sell IPC systems, and their 5-speed systems now are relatively close to the cost of the CO2 systems, the straight ones.
exactly.
It's a better conversation than I would have had
A few years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that 2022 marked the first year that heat pumps outsold gas furnaces here in the United States. So we've seen a transition in the acceptance of heat pumps. So now it's a matter of retraining the technology to our technicians and to our contractors to be able to maintain the expectations of our consumer. Our consumer is looking for higher efficiency capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of times it's on our industry to become better educated because the consumers are starting to become very aware of their energy savings and the capabilities.
Yeah, I've gotten some calls from customers that I've done installs with in the wintertime when it gets colder, and they say, well, it feels like there's cold air coming out of my system, and then I was asking, well, what's the room temperature?
Yeah, exactly.
And then we have the conversation about how the variable speed systems will work down. You're not going to get that 130-degree air coming out like you will from
not the same temperature rise as that old fuel oil system we used to have growing up.
That goes into the efficiency of it in that whole conversation. So
exactly. Yeah. All right, Bill Fisher, thank you so much for joining us. It's interesting to learn about what's happening for the natural gas or the lack of natural gas in your area. So for that high cost of propane, high efficiency heat pumps are absolutely a good choice.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Bill. All right, Robin Henry, come on up. How are you doing, sir?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you're joining us from another piece of the country. You're out in Colorado, right?
I am way down here in the Four Corners area. So if anybody's familiar, we're almost Utah, almost Arizona, almost New Mexico.
I like bringing you into this mix because you have such a variety of background, all related to energy efficiency, right? You spent a lot of time in solar. You've done a lot of energy auditing insulation, which is, I think, going to be the key to the true acceptance of heat pumps going forward. We have to reevaluate our structure. One of the requirements of the DOE when we're looking at cold climate heat pumps is evaluating the actual performance of the structure so that we can hopefully potentially reduce the size of our equipment, and we can reevaluate our electrical loads. So looking at the envelope a lot closer than we have in the past. So in your area, tell us a little bit about how heat pumps are transitioning, and do your consumers look at the cost of gas and look at the cost of electricity the way that they would say when we're just talking about like West Virginia?
That definitely comes into play. We have a lot of propane here as well, and that's where it really comes into the conversation. We have electric resistance heating as well, so we have a pretty big array of how people are heating, conditioning their homes. As far as the cost goes too, we're out here in this area, we're in a pretty rural area. We don't have, at least as far as the electric goes, we have 2 different co-ops, kind of in this service territory. each with their own pricing structures and different rates and all that stuff. So I don't know if anybody's familiar, but general service versus time of use rates,
Yeah,
that kind of comes into play a
very
lot as well.
significant.
It's very significant, especially if you can kind of play, if you opt for time of use, if you want to play to that rate structure and,
Yeah.
electric dryer and load shifting and all that, that definitely goes a long way. And, circling back to my energy auditing experiences, some clients are really into it. They got the magnet on their fridge. They got the magnet
Following
on
the
their
energy trend, knowing
washer
when
and
to use
dryer.
what.
Like, yeah, like, is it time? Like, you better wait, it's
Yeah, a
not,
lot of
yeah.
people don't understand the differences in utility cost across the country. So I use Choose Energy a lot when I'm evaluating the cost of energy so that I can look at what those rates are. If we take your propane, but let's just take a look at natural gas, right? You could take in Colorado, you have some relatively inexpensive natural gas in compared to someplace like Georgia. We're talking 3 times the difference in the cost of gas. So it would be very similar for propane. And then if we look at the electrical side of it, just like you were talking about using with the co-ops, we can look at the different cost of electricity. You could be somewhere in like Nevada and only be paying like 4 cents per kWh, or you could actually be in somewhere, like New York, where we're now talking up in the 20s. So it ranges a lot. So when we're talking about that balance point, I seen one of the questions came in a while ago was our original balance point, was that a comfort or was that efficiency? That was a comfort, because that's what we traditionally looked at. Here is the comfort. But now we start looking at efficiency, man, we could be all over the place. I could take a piece of equipment in one part of the country compared to a piece of equipment in another part of the country and go, we really need to reevaluate this. If we've got propane and now we have electrical that is relatively inexpensive in compared to our propane as a cost per 100,000 BTUs of output. Well, now it's really important to look at the capability and the efficiency of the heat pump. We may be able to completely get away from propane and go to a heat pump source. Do you see that in your area?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And people are getting clued into it more as well.
I believe that.
Like the knowledge base kind of spans from, people have seen it. We've all heard it. Heat pumps don't work around here, period.
Yeah.
It's like from one end of the spectrum to another end where people are like, I don't want that propane tank on my property. I don't want to see it anymore. I want it gone.
It's very expensive.
So like that.
You have to
That's the
schedule
full
it.
spectrum. We had a really wild winter this past season as well. And so unfortunately it was, we had some instances of people just completely running out of propane. Companies they didn't have the drivers, the roads were too bad, there's too much snow, and so people were running out of propane as well. So that kind of comes into the mix as well. So it's not even like a cost thing, but like a reliability. Yeah. So people, we, like you kind of mentioned it earlier too, we have we're kind of not blessed, but we have cheap gas around here. But even people on gas, they're just like they want to get off gas. They just want to be done with it.
Exactly.
So
and looking
really
at what their options are.
Yeah. Embracing
Now,
electrification.
when it does come to our options, it is very important to look at your extended heating data tables of the equipment. I personally use the NEEP database to look at the system efficiencies of different matchups of equipment, because not all heat pumps can perform the same. So I did a little evaluation here a while back. I did a whole show on just heat pump performance, looking at different types of models, because you may require a heat pump that has a better capability at lower temperatures, or you may not. Depends on what your ambient conditions are in your zones. So we look at these different brands, and these are all 3-ton heat pumps matched up to an air handler. So when we start looking at system performance, it's very, very critical to do an actual heat load calculation on the structure, reduce the heat load as much as possible, and then select the correct equipment that will work in your area, because they're not all the same. We see some heat pumps out there that are, I would consider, high quality, not inexpensive heat pumps that have lockout temperatures at 5 degrees, positive 5 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't work below 5 degrees. And then you could jump over to another manufacturer and it may run all the way down into the minus 20s and have good performance. So it's moved from being a brand preference contractor to being a product knowledge base contractor. Do you see that as well, as looking at the performance of the systems in whatever your ambient conditions are?
As far as equipment or
Yes.
manufacturer preference
Yes.
versus performance, I mean, I'll do a cop out and say I like both. Best of both worlds. There we
Sure.
go. And so for me, my preference, I lean towards Mitsubishi. They have the thermal performance. They have the Diamond system builder. That kind of
Yep.
specifies the D rates for elevation. I mean, not
Yep.
to put a plug in for Mitsubishi, but that's my personal preference. So we do have a heating dominated climate here. So AC comes into the mix, but predominantly heating. So definitely
Sure.
want that base pan heater. We want that cold climate capability. Nobody wants to have their heat pump tap out at 5 degrees like you spoke of. You want kind of want
Exactly.
that wiggle room going down to -13, -20. So that's a very important consideration, and kind of goes back to what you spoke of as far as heat pump A will be awesome here, but just completely irrelevant over here. So it's just something to kind of come into consideration.
Sure. And every manufacturer has different types of heat pumps. And that's the important thing to know is whatever your product line is, whatever your brand preference is, make sure that you know the different capabilities of the systems. Because you can look through some of those, let's take brand C. Brand C had a unit that did not go below 5, but they also had a unit that produced a lot of heat. It actually went down to like -13. So it's knowing the capabilities of the products that you're selling. Because if someone goes in with a low bid, it always gets back to if we're bidding against someone that has a low price, make sure the consumer is aware of the capability of that system. You may look at that and go, "Oh, hold on, let me look that up and tell you exactly. Did you know that the system that you were quoted locks out at 5 degrees, and because they didn't give you any supplemental heat, you have no heat on your system below 5 degrees?" And they go, "Well, they didn't tell me that. Let me tell you."
Yeah, don't gloss over that one. You don't
Right.
want to get that phone call.
Exactly. So those extended heating data tables are very important. So most manufacturers have the heating data tables available. You've also got the NEAP database available, but it's very important to do those load calculations. So when you look at a system, how many homes do you do load calculations on?
Every single one.
There's the key.
Yeah, sharp. I come from the opposite end of the spectrum, from typical HVAC guys, in that, I come from the weatherization world, energy auditing world, the building science world.
Yes.
So for me, I nerd out. I love it. And I don't want to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
I want to do the math,
validate it,
and then trust the math, because I think more often than not too, when somebody comes, they approach you, "Hey, I want a heat pump." Talk to my buddy. And they said I need a 3-ton for my, 1-room addition or something.
Right.
I'm just like, oh,
Really?
what?
Let's talk about
Okay,
it.
let's have a conversation. Yeah. So every single one of them is very, very, very critical. And then if nothing else, you got the math to fall back on, rather than
Exactly.
just taking a stab at it.
Robin Henry, thank you so much for sharing the benefits of doing a load calculation on every system to be able to validate what the performance is going to be of what you're selling.
Definitely.
Thanks again. All right. David Kazar, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Now, you have a lot to share. You've seen many generations of heat pump changes throughout the years. So we're talking about a third generation company of 48 years. And you've also spent a lot of time on the engineering side of what our industry looks like. So not only do you have the contractor experience, you have the engineering, the design, and the application experience as well. And you've been installing heat pumps since 1977. You remember the first generation of heat pumps and why they got bad reputations. Let's talk about that just a little bit while we're here.
Sure. In the late 70s in Council Bluffs, I'm Council Bluffs, Iowa, and we would be a predominantly heating market, but cooling is also important. Back in the 70s, our community had a moratorium on gas service. So back in the 70s, any new home that was being built in Council Bluffs had to be all electric.
Oh, wow.
So it was this is not the first go
gas
around
banning in the 70s, right? That's what we're here to talk about. It's not new. It's just a reuse.
No, it's but so there was a lot of learning that the contractors
Oh, yeah.
had to bone up on to be able to provide the heating and cooling that the customers needed. And I can also attest that when we were doing new homes back in the 70s, air conditioning was optional. We didn't always put an air conditioner in
You may not have been
a
sizing for
new home
cooling at
back in the
all.
70s.
Right. You were
And
designing by the
and
heating load.
um, but for me, I was right. We were designing for the heating load, but my father was also an Iowa State University. Well, it was Iowa State College, but so when he got out of college in 1956, that was one of the things that he was starting to look at, is looking at air conditioning and heat pumps,
Yes.
because this was what
It's a bonus
was
product.
coming forward in the late 50s. Up, heat pumps are coming up, and so early on, for me, education was important, because we knew that if we remained in the past, that we were going to be
Left
irrelevant.
behind.
We're going to become irrelevant. And so for me, education is vital to continuing on in the
And
business.
growing.
My grandfather started the business in 1936, and yes, I am the third generation family member in the business, and I personally have been in business for 48 years. So it's
Seen a lot.
a lot of things have come around. And for me, heat pumps fit a very unique market. It got a bad reputation because they were not installed properly. They weren't sized properly. And so for many, many years, the consumer in my area didn't want to have anything to do with heat pumps, because they had multiple compressor failures.
Exactly.
They had very poor experiences. They had very poor performance out of the equipment, and a lot of it was application driven, but some of it was early design as well. We found that oil return was critical. And regardless of whether it was put in properly, installed the way the manufacturer, we just weren't getting oil return that would cause premature compressor failures, multiple compressor failures in the first 5 years of operation. So that kind of hesitancy of the consumer to go back to a heat pump requires not only education on the contractor's part, but educating the consumer and reassuring them that we have made tremendous advances in the design and manufacturing of the equipment, so that that it's typically not a manufacturing process, a problem anymore.
It's an installation or
It's a
design.
problem of improper design, improper application, improper installation. And we hear it all the time, is that compressors don't die, they're murdered.
Absolutely.
Because of wrong application, wrong installation practices, and just poor design practices. So that continuous education is so critical, not only for the contractor, but for the consumer themselves, so that they can feel comfortable in knowing that the contractor they're working with is educated on what it takes, and they're going to recommend a system that is going to be best for their application. The thing that I see, especially in new homes with the higher efficiencies that we're requiring out of the structure, is that we're finding that load calculations are a must. They've always been a must.
It's more important than ever.
Duct design has always been important, because that's how we deliver our product. We deliver heating and cooling through ductwork, and if we improperly size it, we're not going to be satisfied with the results that we have coming out of the registers. And even more critical today is looking at the terminal devices, so that we make sure that we're getting the air where it's supposed to go. but then manual S is so critical that we have to match the equipment to the structure. And we find that since we're reducing those sensible loads in the structure, because higher insulation values, better solar coefficients, solar heat load factors for the windows, that we're reducing that sensible load, but that latent load is still there. And we're finding that if we don't educate ourselves in how the structures are changing, and realizing that a greater percentage of our load in the cooling side is becoming that latent load, which in some particular cases, when you start looking at the expanded cooling performance of the heat pumps and the air conditioners, our sensible heat ratio for the equipment is still roughly about 70%, but we're seeing that our latent loads are coming in at 40%, 50% of what the performance or the requirements for the home are. So educating yourself as a contractor, knowing how the structures are changing and how that impacts our load is critical on how we look at designing our systems. Do we always look at heat pumps and single stage? We can't.
No, not at all.
Not anymore. We have to start looking at multiple stage or variable stage equipment to match the load of the equipment with the structure and the occupants. So then when we look at that, well, if our latent load is still high, maybe we need to consider also looking at additional appliances, dehumidification, whole house dehumidification, portable dehumidification to supplement that dehumidification load that's still going to be there, regardless of whether of what our sensible load is.
Exactly. A lot of re-education on system design, understanding the capabilities of systems, a whole lot of inverter training. I was going to dive into that, but I don't know we're going to have enough time to get specific on inverter training. But have you done inverter training for your technicians? Are you getting more comfortable with inverter technology?
Well, since about 2006, I've become a mom and pop operation. My wife and I are the company, and so training is something that's a continual cycle for me. When I'm done with 1 year of training, it's starting again. I typically will see anywhere from 100 to 200 years of continuing education hours, just so that I can be on top of what the technology is coming forward. And so for me, and if I went back to having employees again, we would be having continuous education, whether it be a lunchbox, at the service bench. We'd be having those short little education moments, but it would be back in the classroom as well, because if we're not learning, again, we become irrelevant, and people aren't going to look at us as the experts.
Sure. We have so many things changing. When we start talking about heat capabilities, going forward, we're going to have to look at heat pumps a little bit differently, and understanding that we're actually increasing the capabilities of our systems. Our manufacturers are shooting for new designs for cold climate performance specifications. A lot of people don't know what those are. Cold climate is basically saying that at 5 degrees, I'm going to have a minimum of 1.75 COP, right? Our electric furnaces have a COP of, around 1, depending on losses due to motors and et cetera. But now we're looking at equipment going, all right, we are pushing for new technology. So as the push for new technology comes into play, the push for education on that new technology becomes required. So thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate those insights. A lot of great information there, and I look forward to some continued conversations. I got a lot of things I'd like to ask you of transitions of heat pumps.
Take care.
Appreciate it. All right, let's talk with Thomas Soha. Tom, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing fine, Clifton. I almost forgot I was part of this. I was sitting here taking so many notes.
There's a lot of good things to share, and that's the beauty of having this. I keep talking about this like village. I always kept saying the village of HVAC. Well, now it's like turning into this big community of HVAC. And how do you raise a child in a community, in a village? everyone takes their part. Everyone has their responsibility. Everyone takes their specialty and they hand it off to the next generation and to those that are around them. So we all have so much to learn. I didn't know how bad of a technician I was until I started teaching and started working with other professionals.
You're not the only one, brother.
Exactly. And so we come together to share our experiences. I mean, you started back in 1983. You've done industrial, commercial. You're my kind of guy. You tasted all the different flavors of HVAC to see what is out there. And you started teaching to be able to help these other generations and to help our own generation to understand things that are different in the world, different in our industry, right? So
Yeah, pretty much.
let's talk about some of the changes that you've seen. One of the big things that we see is, this whole electrification and, degasification or decarbonization. A lot of people look at them as the same, and they're really not, because there are places where we're not going to be able to do a elimination of fuel, right? We got places that rely on fuel, so we have to become better at reducing the CO2 emissions of our fuels, as well as trying to convert to electrical when we can. So let's talk a little bit about how you see that in your area, and what does decarbonization and electrification look like?
Well, in our area, we've always been pretty much a 50-50 market.
Okay.
We'll see 50% of heat pumps, 50% gas furnaces. Of course, you get a smattering of LP and fuel oil, and their fuel oil is not as prevalent in this area. It might be 2 or 3% of the market overall.
Yeah, about same here.
And we started hearing these terms, decarbonization, electrification, popping up in the last couple of years. And they've always been around, at least the function of it, because I remember all the way back in the 80s and everything else, certain builders on the new construction format only wanting heat pumps in.
Yeah.
And it was, to meet the energy guides that the government would put out, the Department of Energy.
Exactly.
And so when we started hearing these terms popped up, I went, of course, you're going back to the source of it, which is the government. Certain organizations pushing them, and they're passing rulings. So I go back to the DOE. They've got a great website, actually, which breaks it all down. It's the roadmap to decarbonization.
Yep.
At energy.gov. And so I get a lot of the information I use on that when people are asking me about that.
Same here. A lot of good resources there.
Electrification is actually just one of the pillars of decarbonization.
That's right.
So it's part of the overall plan.
It's a piece. It's not the same thing.
Exactly. They can be used interchangeably. You get the same idea across. Decarbonization being the reduction of gases, fossil fuels in all processes, not just our part of the industry, which is primarily residential, light commercial, for the most part of everybody that we've been talking to today, and probably a good portion of our audience as well.
Yeah.
But also the way we use petroleum products, food waste, that takes that into consideration. It takes into the packaging, recycling, the alternative packaging. We've all seen things change over the recent years. Once used to have nice, form fitting. We call them, bubble packing. Only reason I know some of the terms, my uncle was a packaging guy.
Sure.
So we all saw these all solid, packaging, boxes and everything else, and now we're seeing it just basically wrapped in a plastic bag for the most part.
Right. Being more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, more friendly. Cut down that waste, cut down that. Increase recycled. Certain industries, grocery store, going back to paper bags after years of them being the evil thing.
So you see the consumers becoming more environmentally conscious, especially our younger generations. That's very, very important for Gen Z and our youngest, which is Alpha. So as consumers are starting to look for products, what part of the country are you in? And are people starting to look for more higher efficient fuel equipment and higher efficient heat pump technologies?
Well, we're in mid-Atlantic states, central North Carolina. Our service area is pretty much everywhere from Fayetteville out to Pittsburgh and beyond. Where we go where the work is.
Yeah, exactly.
And probably running a 75-mile radius of Raleigh. What we're running into is we're seeing a smattering of people wanting to get rid of their gas systems, going to high efficiency heat pumps. But more so, we're seeing heat pumps wanting to step up their game.
Yes.
Getting, less power usage, more, a smaller footprint,
Right.
smaller outlook on it. And one of the big problems we have with that is a lot of these homes, I don't know how familiar you are with this area, but we had the big building boom in the late 80s,
Right.
early 90s. And, and not to denigrate any of, our competition. I was the competition at one time. I worked for all those companies, but the duct systems were done to a bare minimum because, we had all the track builders.
Yeah.
We had a lot of people coming in and building, the $120,000 home. And it was just a matter of they kept year after year after year trying to cut their trades down as to what they charged them. Going in and saying, all right, I've had this many price increases. Now they drive the cost down.
Yep.
And so heat and air companies had to do what they had to do to survive. Electricians had to do what they had to do to survive, all the way across. So you don't see wiring. You don't see it being able to handle a little bit larger of a load than what it was originally intended. So you're not seeing, a number 10 where a number 12, would suffice. They ran the number 12 because it was lower cost.
Exactly.
Ductwork was sized just specifically with no growth in mind, with no efficiency increases in mind. So we try to overcome that now. Yeah. So when we get down to, all right, everybody thinks that has to switch to a heat pump. We need to look at lower turbulent duct systems. We need to look at being able to deliver the air from the heat pump in a manner that it actually does some good to the home. So that's the big problems that we run into in this market is mostly our duct systems are not designed for this.
Yeah, one of the things that we're going to have to start becoming more aware of is the actual electrical panel capabilities of our structures. We always talk about the envelope of the structure, and so there are times where as HVAC or refrigeration companies, we may have to actually reevaluate the structure, not just on the heat capabilities, the heat load of the structure and ways to reduce it, but we may actually have to do electrical panel inspections. There's going to be, there's supposed to be, whenever that's all released to the IRA, there's going to be electrical panel upgrade incentives for homeowners to be able to increase the electrical panels. So it's a pretty significant rebate, as well as rebates for other home improvement projects. So the whole goal is to evaluate the structure, see what components could be upgraded to be able to reduce the heat load, the demand on the system, and then resize and find the new load calculation for the structure. But along the way, as HVAC contractors, we may have to become more in tune with electrical panel inspections and what that looks like, so that when we're looking at a system, we can determine if we actually have the electrical capabilities that would be required. So great point.
Yeah, we looked at that a few years back as our ownership here and management team looked at the wisdom of being a one-stop shop.
You betcha.
So we're an HVAC contractor because we're a retail operation.
Yeah.
So we're an HVAC contractor. We have a plumbing division. We have an electrical division, weatherization division. So we're looking at all the aspects of taking care of the home as a holistic situation.
We're a solution
home is just
finder.
An extension of ductwork.
Yeah, absolutely. So being more flexible as a contractor is going to be very important to be able to diversify our portfolio of services, understanding new technologies, training on inverters, understanding load calculations, and looking at ways that we can provide a better service to our consumer. So Tom, I sure appreciate you today, and I think we're going to wrap this up, and we're going to start hopping into some Q&A here. So we'll regroup here in just a second. We'll get everyone involved. Yeah, there's the panel. How about that? All right, so let's jump back in here real quick. Shelby, Ben, we have any specific questions that we would like to cover in this? Well, there's a lot of great comments out there.
Yes, indeed. So right at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the first question from David Horton on LinkedIn. How does electric backup resistance heat get accounted for in design or comparing efficiency? And just some notes about controls here.
That's a good one. There's a few people on here that could tackle that one. Any volunteers?
As far as resistance heat in our market, it's a certain percentage of load that they're looking at. So if we're covering 80% of the load in total load on the house, unfortunately, as an industry in this area, we've done a poor job at doing proper heat load calculations. We're an AC country. 10 months out of the year, the air conditioner is running. So we're trying to get better at that. I mean, as a company, we're definitely working toward that. We're always looking at system loads, system requirements, as opposed to the electrical that the house can actually produce for us. So we do take it's a big plug. It's a big part of our design. When we look at a system, we really have to pay attention to what the city's providing.
Sure. Tim, I see you a little itchy over there. Did you have something you want to add into that?
Yeah, I think well, if we're talking about a retrofit situation, which I think this webinar is kind of talking more about getting people to invest in heat pumps as opposed to throwing another furnace in there. Right. I think dual fuel options are just a great middle ground as we figure this out over the next 10 years.
Exactly.
For some reason, there's this war on fossil fuels, and it's creating, because everything now gets politicized, it's created like this mob fervor against even like a sensible drawdown of gas. But we don't have to rip out that gas furnace every time. Exactly. We can replace that AC with a heat pump, and we can get that balance point down as low as possible. Yep. We have to remember that the coefficient of performance on even a standard heat pump, not even a cold climate heat pump, but a standard heat pump, is like 4 to 1. The COP on a gas furnace is 0.9, 0.95. You're only getting 95% of the energy you're putting in. Now, the cost of that energy is a little bit different, but I'm sorry, gas prices are catching up to electrical prices. Yeah. So we have to think about how can you turn down 400% efficiency. So that's an important factor there, and just understanding that we probably should be putting in cold climate heat pumps, even in climates like mine here in North Carolina. Now, I'm on coastal North Carolina. Our design temperatures are like 28 degrees. I think people are getting away with not doing it. But when I was in central North Carolina in Greensboro, I was putting in, if I was going to take someone's furnace out and substitute that for a heat pump, I ain't messing around with a 14 SEER heat pump with 10, 15 kW. Why am I wasting those people's time? You got to drag a wire this big over to the air handler. Why am I messing around with that when I can put in something that never has to have supplemental heat in my climate? Now, of course, you get into northern climates, you got to think about that a little bit more. But just remember that cold climates does not just mean Minnesota and other places where you need Samuel L. Jackson to tell you how cold it is. And used to say, yeah, I love that line. It also includes moderate climates too.
Absolutely. I want to jump in really quick here on this resistance heat conversation, because it is a bit of a nuanced conversation, and I think that it requires a little more talking than just the surface question of how do we account for the efficiency of that, because the bigger picture is a little bit what Tim hinted to, is basically, let's get rid of the resistance heat altogether. Now, there's a way to do that, and there's a way not to do that. The way not to do it is say, hey, take this heat pump and put it in this house that is not ready for it to be put in, and don't put any backup heat on it because we don't need the damn backup heat, and then let the heat pump run out, and then all of a sudden somebody's complaining about the heat pump. That is the exact thing that we're trying to fight against here. So the biggest point to make about this is know what house you're putting this heat pump in, right? And if the house needs to be improved before we put a heat pump in so we can get rid of the resistance heat, then that probably makes more sense than putting in an old heat pump with resistance heat backup just to satisfy an old house so we can say we put a heat pump in it. That is the type of thing that I, personally myself, I am on a mission to fight against that type of thinking, because doesn't make any sense, and it is very defeatism to what everybody is trying to accomplish here. Another just side point to make real quick on something Tim said is, like, below the Bible Belt, a lot of the manufacturers are not even offering their cold climate heat pumps to their contractors. I interact with a lot of contractors in southern markets that work for big manufacturers, and they literally do not have access to the model numbers of the cold climate heat pumps because their manufacturer considers them to not be in a cold climate and they shouldn't be selling that particular heat pump. So I think it starts way up the food chain, the way people are thinking about this stuff. We need to change that and be able to like go into the thinking about it logically. And I wrote an article some time ago about don't throw order of operations out the window because we want to put heat pumps in every house. And this is like the main point of that. Like order of operations is look at the envelope. Let's see what we can do to fix that. Then let's start talking about heat pumps and how they can work efficiently in a home that is set up for it. Sorry to go on a rant, but
no, I'm glad you did. That's exactly why we're here.
Yeah. Utilizing heat pumps, there's a lot of new emerging technologies that are going to help keep those heat strips at a lower use. We're hearing and looking into cocoon furnaces, things along those lines, which thermal mass technology. It's being used very effectively up in the Northeast. It's used, when we're looking up at Nova Scotia, Canada, all through there, it's being used to replace oil furnaces with no problems. So getting that technology into the southern markets and taking that footprint out of it, these aging electrical grids, we can do a lot of good in that because we're not going to be using anywhere near as much power.
Sure. It's about energy reduction in any form that we can get to. We've actually got jurisdictions that are not approving electric resistant heat on cold climate installations. You're not allowed to get the rebates if you have an electric resistance backup source. And we have contractors that are relooking at the package afterwards going, you know what, if we would just replace some windows and put some insulation in this building, we probably wouldn't even need the electric resistance to begin with. And that is really the challenge that we have, is the acceptance of we need to reduce our energy consumption. How do we do that? We relook at our structures. So yes, we're in the business of moving heat and conditioning air, but now we're moving into a state where we're evaluating the performance of a structure. We are becoming building specialists, as we should. Awesome.
So one more question from Gary on YouTube. Can you share a little bit about the cost and procedure for regular maintenance of inverter heat pumps?
Anybody want to run that one? It's a lot less maintenance when it's installed properly and commissioned and sized right. Go Tim.
Well, the biggest point you have to remember is you have to change your chemicals because many of them microchannel or plated channels, tinted coils on the outside and everything else. Using traditional coil cleaners is going to strip a lot of that away. It's going to weaken connections. So using the proper chemicals that are designed for that type of coil, that'll help a lot with maintenance. And also, in many cases with these inverters, we can go to a once-a-year plan instead of a twice-a-year plan.
Yes,
but that applies.
I agree. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. But that applies even to a lot of heat pumps that are not inverter, right? We're seeing microchannels and all these other things.
Yeah, true.
Kind of start to be used, right? And so honestly, it being an inverter isn't necessarily adding to the cost of any maintenance. It's still a heat pump, right? Still same materials.
Chemicals, maybe that'd be about it. Sometimes we're seeing slight increases on the cost of some of the chemicals that we would be using for microchannels.
Well, a lot of manufacturers will recommend no chemicals. To be quite honest with you,
why are we using coil cleaner on residential heat pump coils anyway? What's getting on them? It's grass clippings and dirt. I don't need chemicals to wash that off my coil. And I do agree with what you said about once per year maintenance. That's really where we as an industry need to start moving towards. The old thing, again, twice a year with gas fire, because you have to do a combustion analysis when it's actually cold outside, but you can't check your air conditioning. And there are ways now that we can, again, when you use Measure Quick or something like that, proper commissioning and being able to benchmark the system, you can go back and now do a non-invasive check once a year.
That's right.
And the only thing, why are we coming back to do maintenance? We're coming back to do cleaning, maybe tighten some electrical connections. I mean, there is a huge value in maintenance, but twice a year maintenance, we can get away from that if we do one really good maintenance and we use that as the opportunity to connect with our customers. Twice a year maintenance was more for companies that want to get in front of that customer twice a year, maybe to try to sell them something maybe that they need, maybe that they don't need. But as far as what the customer needs, a typical residential system, if you do a good job, once a year should be plenty for it. That thing's sitting on the top of a rooftop of a old Waffle House or something. Yeah, you're gonna probably need to clean the coils a little bit more often. But we're more focused on residential in this conversation.
All right,
I think
Ben,
our maintenance programs is going to look.
Hey guys, let's hold up on this one. I see Ben back there talking, or in the background here. Oh, we got a mic not coming on.
Oh, no, you guys are good.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Continue on. We've got like another minute or two.
Sure. Let's grab another question while we're out here and see what we've got for some additional
Jeremy,
comments.
though, you're trying to talk. I can't hear you.
That's what I was thinking. I couldn't see anything coming through in the background.
Okay.
All right. Well, how are we doing here, guys?
Here we go.
Hey,
Sorry.
there we are.
One important point. I'm sorry. I've been trying to spit this out for 5 minutes now.
There you go.
One of the biggest maintenance savers on heat pumps is contractor education, believe it or not.
Absolutely.
I have guys go back 5 times to fix stuff that doesn't need to be fixed because they installed it wrong. And all they had to do is understand the thing that they're installing. I swear. And then they're charging this to the customer and they're getting upset and blaming it on the heat pump. And it's not the heat pump. And it's not necessarily the contractor. It's the shop that didn't teach him what he was installing in the first place. So that is a big, understand this equipment, guys. That is a huge point that I want to make to, our stratospheric contractors out there.
Well, how good a piece of equipment is only as good as how well it's installed.
Yeah, very true. Installation and commissioning. So what it really comes down to as contractors, as technicians, we have a lot of re-education to do. Our equipment is changing. Therefore, we need to learn best practices for the equipment that we're going to be working with. We need to learn the technology. We need to invest in training to understand inverters a little bit better. And so we have transitions that are happening in our industry that are going to require education. So more than any other time, at least in my history in the industry, right now is the most crucial point for education. That's why we come together, to share our experiences, to share our tales from the trenches, to help prepare people for the things that they're going to see. We're going to have some difficult times in the months and years to come. We're going to have some headaches, but we also have experience that we can rely on and that will get us into that point where we can learn from our past experiences and mistakes to be able to become more efficient, to put bodies in the field faster that are more efficient at what they're doing, and using technology like smart diagnostic tools and software like MeasureQuick to validate the performance and the efficiency of our systems. I think it's going to be more critical now than ever to evaluate the true performance. So I see Shelby hopping up in there.
Yes, Clifton, thank you so much for leading an incredible discussion.
Absolutely.
Jeremy, Tim, Dave, Thomas and Robin, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your insights with everyone else on the line. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce our last speaker, which is Brent Davidson. Also, thank you, Bill Fisher. I missed your name in there, but our last speaker, Brent Davidson, who will share a little bit about the Heat Pump Summit.
Awesome. Hey everyone, my name is Brent and I'm here to tell you about the Heat Pump Summit. It's a conference training event for contractors happening in Berkeley, California on November 13th. This event, 3 parts to it. There's a detailed training day, conference content, and trade show tables. It's important to note that this event does cover both HVAC and water heating. Quick run through some of the interesting stuff that'll be happening here. The training is really focused on covering from start to finish, from sales through commissioning. Folks like Larry Waters of Electrify My Home, he's going to be talking about successful business with electrification. He's been doing heat pumps only for many years. Building engineer Ben Knopp, he's going to talk about detailed design. Really interesting live demonstration model, kind of correcting some common myths of basic fluid dynamics that affects HVAC. And MeasureQuick's Joe Medosh is going to be there, rounding that out with commissioning. Also, a REAM manufacturer training will be happening, and for folks out in California, that'll qualify you for the TechClean California's new heat pump water heater rebate. Conference content is all targeted at contractors, very tactical stuff. Bunch of strategies around like fitting new load into the electrical panel, emergency retrofit installs, successful strategies for that, both in air and water. Lots more to cover. Check out the heatpumpsummit.org website for the full lineup. And it's going to be a jam-packed day. Everything's really from that building science-based approach. And the goal of the event's just to make happy heat pump customers, size small for the grid, and meet other experts by attending the summit. We can give a discount for folks on this webinar, MQ100 for Measure Quick. MQ100 gets $100 off. And we've got a great hotel rate, $139, DoubleTree on the San Francisco Bay. And more info, like I said, heatpumpsummit.org, and you can reach me, Brent, at heatpumpsummit.org. That's what I got for you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brent. So with that, we conclude our time today during Tales from the Trenches. We are so appreciative of all of our practitioners who joined us in Clifton, Beck, for leading this conversation. We covered a lot of ground, from the transition to inverter technology to the complexities of refrigerants. And we really appreciate you sticking around to learn more about it. So with that, just wanted to share one last plug for the next webinar in this series. It'll be on a different date, and it's on October 17th. So that's a Tuesday at the same time, 11 a.m. Eastern. So we hope you join us to learn a little bit more about design and sizing, one of my other favorite topics. This was certainly one of them today as well. So thank you, everyone. And we really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Measure Quick.